So excited. Thursdays bring this guy in. He is the former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table. You've heard him on London radio, on New York television, on Los Angeles and San Francisco media. He's all over the place. So kind to spend some time with us. He's the great David Katz, everyone. Hi, David.
Great to be with you.
Good to see you, sir. I want to ask you first about this legit conversation that's going on, I guess, is legit. I mean, the governor of Texas is talking about, I won't let the federal government. He's playing it right down the middle, but essentially setting up a situation by which the federal government, those who are representatives of the feds, can't get to the areas that they need to get to. This is along the border because of the razor wire setup. You understand it's just a mess down there. And essentially the Texas mess, they are saying you can't touch that. The feds can't, even though this is obviously, it's federal jurisdiction, isn't it?
Well, they'll be able to get an order from the federal court saying that federal officials can access any of these sites. I mean, we are not in, a post-Fort Sumter moment when some state can exclude federal troops or the federal government from some important part of the state. And this is the border, the international border. Now, the Congress has particular authority under the Constitution to deal with it. That's one of the issues when they keep trying to blame the executive branch. The executive branch enforces the law. Biden and the DHS enforce the law, but Congress does set the rules. Of course, the right-wing House is off in one direction and the more moderate Senate is more trying to solve the problem. Trump, of course, is trying to campaign on this issue and wants to do nothing to actually ameliorate it. But regarding this particular thing down in Texas, no, the state cannot exclude the federal government from access either directly or by putting razor wire that would endanger the federal officers who are trying to get there. And in fact, the federal government has already won this fight against Texas. They won it in a 5-4 decision, which allowed the federal government to keep doing what the federal government wants to do, which is basically to take down that razor wire that was injuring the people, the migrants trying to get into the country across that river, in some instances injuring them quite severely. And the U.S. Supreme Court said to 5-4 that while they're waiting to decide the case, Mark, that the state cannot just go put razor wire and other obstructions. Why? Because it's an international border that is left to the federal government. It's not up to the states. They're not an independent state or independent country. Texas is not.
So the Texas governor, who's smack talking essentially and kind of turning this situation into some political currency for himself, I'd suggest, he's saying that the state has a right to protect itself from what he calls an invasion. And he, in the judgment of the Supreme Court, as you've just said, he's kind of shining it on. If he can't Bigfoot the Supreme Court and the feds, that won't happen, right, David Katz? I mean, I know this is not a legal judgment necessarily, but it's just sort of I'm asking you to kind of assess this, the politics as well as the legality of this.
Well, it is a legal judgment. And, from the point of view of politics, it's all a matter of how it resounds, how it resonates or not, with the rest of the country. And there's a huge immigration debate going on many levels right now. And I'd love to talk about it if you have a few minutes for that.
Please. Yeah.
But regarding this issue of big-footing them, apparently it's a much bigger issue in Texas than it is in other places. It's also a big issue in New York City and Chicago if they have to dip into other social relief, social welfare funds in order to pay money for this mass of migrants that have arrived in New York and Chicago and Denver. They really are alarming numbers, to the point that even people who are very sympathetic to the plight of the migrants say, wait a second, are you going to actually cut payments to poor people? Because, the left's answer to everything is we'll tax the rich and we'll pay for both the migrants and we'll keep social services for the poor in place. But let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say what ends up happening is it's a zero-sum game between people who are getting welfare benefits, who are getting housing assistance, who are getting food supplementary payments in the big cities, and they're suddenly getting cut back to pay for the migrants. And of course, if the federal government and Biden simply pay the bill, Mark, for all of these migrants, you know that the swing states are going to scream. We all work hard. We're all living here in America. Why do we suddenly have over 3 million migrants? And Mark, the numbers really are astonishing. The numbers in December are stuff that even if you're a sympathetic humanitarian on this issue, you take a look and you say, wait a second. I mean, all these people are coming in, getting paroled into the United States, being allowed to stay here pending their asylum hearings. And yet the asylum hearings, it's taking 5 or 6 years to get to them. Biden and the Democrats say, well, give us more immigration judges. And that's obviously very important. But you could double the immigration judges, right? And still, so you cut the time down from 5 to 6 years to 4 to 5 years. It still raises the issue. Do you parole millions of people into the United States? Basically, they run up. They don't sneak across the border, although about 1.5 million sneak across the border. But about 3 million under the Biden administration go to the immigration or customs official and they say, please parole me into the United States. I'm going to make an asylum claim. And if I can make one more thing on this, and I don't mean to be controversial, but the issue is so controversial. If you say that you're scared of gang violence in your native country, that will support an asylum claim. That will support, you may not win ultimately, but that will support them paroling you into the United States. I'm scared of gang violence in my home country. If you say that in Spain, which is a socialist government, they say no, that does not support an asylum claim. We're talking about something, picture something more like the Nazis. Picture something maybe even more like Somoza in Central America when he was around in the 70s. But we're not talking about gang violence. That's what socialist Spain says. That does not support an asylum claim. And you get beyond that and you get to domestic violence, you can see why some people are saying this is unsustainable. If every person who can get through Mexico, and Mexico doesn't do a lot to stop them, Mark, that's a whole other thing. We should have more diplomacy with Mexico. And that's something that I think Biden could do right now. It would be very controversial, but to tell Mexico, you need to do more about this problem, or else, you know, we're going to, I don't know, cut back the NAFTA benefits, cut back,
Sure.
do something with remissions, do something that will get Mexico's attention so Mexico will help solve this problem. Because one of the problems, Mark, is that if you deport a person back to Mexico, that's been a very, very big issue. If the person crosses the border between Mexico and the United States and you cannot put the person back into Mexico where they crossed from, if Mexico won't accept them, that's a huge problem. And one last thing, China, for example, won't take people back who snuck in from China. China won't take them back. I mean, that just seems to me like something that just doesn't make any sense. But of course, what's America supposed to do? China won't take them back. They're from China. They snuck into the United States. Now what do? Parole them into the United States? Send them to Mexico, which won't take them? What do?
They're calling it an invasion. And as you've just suggested, the numbers are overwhelming. And because this language of an invasion is being used by Greg Abbott, governor there, also by Kristi Noem, and Kim Reynolds, who's in South Dakota, Ted Cruz, who's also Texas senator, they're all kind of adopting this language of an invasion. And the reason that might be important legally is Abbott is saying, I have declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. Could the use of the word invasion be a way that Abbott can square off against the feds on this?
He could use the word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and it doesn't change the law. This is a federal responsibility. You can't say, oh my God, Arkansas is being invaded by people from Missouri, so therefore it's not a federal problem. And also it's not, Arkansas and Missouri. It's our international border. Now, I understand, I think everyone should understand that this is a real problem right there at the border. It's a huge problem right there in Eagle Pass when you have literally thousands of people coming across this spot in Eagle Pass. And there have been so many iterations of this, and there were so many times there was reporting in the New York Times, I think it's just today, about the front page story about the split in the White House. And of course, there's a very humanitarian part of this debate, and there's an unsustainable part, which is the other side of the debate. And when you meet somebody who's here in the United States without papers, generally speaking, they're great. They're terrific. It can be the fellow who parks your car. It can be also some engineer who's working here. It can be all kinds of people that you meet, and they're great. And then when you think about the border, you think, well, wait a second, this is not sustainable. We cannot bring 7 or 10 million people. And where do you draw the line, Mark? It's a very, very hard issue where you draw the line. And part of it was that Trump made this issue so toxic, separating families, doing the awful things that he did, that on day one, Biden said, I'm going to have a moratorium on deporting people. And that has come back to bite him the way it's all turned out. He had moratorium on deporting people. He got overturned by the courts. You could say the courts are too right wing, whatever. They're packed by Trump appointees, but whatever, the courts did overturn him on that. Now he's deporting more people. The irony was that they called Obama the deporter in chief because he kept deporting people. Obama deported more people than Trump. You can look it up. What Obama was hoping was that would show good faith on the Democrat side, so the Republicans would come to the table and they would make a deal, which more border security, what the Republicans want, a pathway to citizenship, what the Democrats want. Now there's this bill that the Republicans are, not really wanting to sign. They're not really wanting to move it forward at the end of the day. Minority Leader McConnell has kind of given up on it after really pushing it. It may be the reason why we don't get more aid to Ukraine, which would truly be a tragedy. This country needs to stand up to Russia. Ukraine will do the fighting for us if we just pay. And Mark, most of the stuff that we're paying for is spent right here in the U.S. of A. It's
Sure.
Our armaments. This has been a boon to the U.S. defense industry. So we're gaining in every way, in my opinion, by standing up to Russia, helping Ukraine to stand up to Russia, have Ukraine actually fight. But that's the lever, and it looks like it's not going to happen. It looks like this immigration bill is going to fail because the Republicans, especially in the House, have decided it's better for them politically to put on this clown show of impeaching DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and to oppose this and to have this whole, the border's so bad, the border's so bad. And to the extent that Biden is at least now trying to fix it, to try really do something, they're not going to pass new legislation. So my last thought on the subject, Mark, is that within the law, I think Biden ought to do what he can to control this situation and say that I'm really trying. And if the left really abandons him on this issue, they want Trump on this issue. It's like the people who are pro Palestine rights. They want Trump. They think Trump's going to do better for pro-Palestinian issues. They think that Trump is going to do better on a sensible immigration policy. They're going to really abandon Biden over this issue. I sure hope they don't, because whatever Biden does now to clamp down on the border, to make it harder to get these asylum petitions and to stay here, do they want Trump? That's going to be the question this whole year in the election going forward. Do they really want Trump? Because Trump, Biden, I mean, put your big boy pants on. It's Biden and Trump, whether you like it or not. That's it. That's the choice.
Well, it's such an interesting and important point you make, because even the politics within the administration, when the border policy came up, took the form of anything Trump did, we want to reverse. And the reality is that his Remain in Mexico policy probably was doing you a favor, Joe Biden. The problem with the Remain in Mexico policy was that it was being exploited by sexual predators and by gangs. And in other words, those people who had to remain in Mexico waiting for some immigration hearing whenever it was going to happen, they were being targeted. You could refine that policy and reinstitute it. And I think the Biden administration is quietly doing that in some ways. They're looking for ways to reinstitute some of these policies. But the idea somehow that we want to undo everything that the Trump administration did, it has not served the Democrats particularly well. And really, the GOP and the right own this immigration issue, even as Democrats have made strides. You just talked about the fact that President Obama was, the deporter in chief, as you noted. I want to ask you about this. I know it's crazy, this 14th Amendment thing. It keeps coming up. But might the 14th Amendment really be alive? The 14th Amendment, which would remove Donald Trump from the ballot in the presidential election because of his involvement in a coup.
Well, Katz will put my 18-0 record on your show, Mark, over this last year on the line and boldly predict that the United States Supreme Court will not end up ruling that Colorado can keep Trump off the ballot. I think if they do that, they will see way too much just from a political, prudential point of view. At least 5, 6 of them will feel they are not there to interpret the Constitution in such a remarkable way. Now, of course, they're there to interpret the Constitution in a remarkable way toward the Second Amendment, in making the Dobbs decision, in claiming that they're originalists. And I think if you're an originalist, it's very, very clear. There was an insurrection of just the sort that the framers of the 14th Amendment were talking about. He engaged in the insurrection by not tamping it down, by inciting it, by giving the incendiary speeches, by the whole run up to January 6th. And so I think it's all there. And then there's an issue about whether it's self-executing, which sounds, like inside baseball. But what that means is, does a constitutional provision execute itself? Does it become effective? Or does Congress have to pass enabling legislation? And that doesn't make any sense either, because that's not how we've handled these things. No one says, oh, I don't have a 14th Amendment right to due process because there's not some statute I can point to. You point to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and you say, I'm an originalist, I'm a textualist, I'm reading the text, it says that there's equal protection, right? And so that's exactly what the Constitution says here. It says someone who's engaged in an insurrection. So I think the only thing that people are arguing about now, which is sort of a serious argument, is whether Trump is an officer or not. And that's
Right.
what right now they're using a Justice Scalia, the lion of the conservatives, who's speaking from the grave to say, wait a second, watch out on this one, because it sure seems like he's an officer, that all of the other language in the Constitution and in statutes talks about the president as an officer. So, of course, the president's an officer. If he's not an officer of the United States, why are we putting him in the White House at government expense? Why are we paying his Secret Service at government expense? This guy sure looks like he works for the government. He's the head of the government, but they didn't expressly write that it applies to the president. And there's all kinds of, everyone's talking about that on the internet, debating it on cable TV and stuff like that. But I think it's clear that Trump is an officer of the United States. I think there's some way that the Supreme Court will get out of actually deciding it, Mark. So I think even by the liberals and the intellectuals in their amicus briefs citing that opinion, by this concurring opinion, it was not only by Scalia, it was with Chief Justice Roberts. But it's easy to say it was in another context. It wasn't actually directed to the use of officer. And it is true, you could use officer to mean something in 90 different statutes and provisions, right, Mark? And then from the history of it, when you use the word officer or you don't use the word officer, it means something else there. But bottom line, I think they're going to say that they're not going to get involved in it as it goes through the courts, that if Trump really does end up being selected by the Congress, that's also the time for Congress to deal with this issue, that it's up to Congress to bar him from office. It's up to Congress. I don't think they're going to say to pass the statute, but I think they're going to say this is a question which belongs to the Congress. It doesn't belong to the courts. Now, it's much harder to say it doesn't belong to Colorado. We've talked about this before because we decide these things state by state. And unless there's some federal question involved. So I think for that, if they're going to reach that, they're going to have to say that Trump or anyone else who looks like they're on their way to a major party nomination has a right to run, has a federal right to run and to be involved in it. And therefore, it is a federal question whether Colorado or any other state can bar a major candidate like that from the ballot. I just do not believe, you can play this back if I'm wrong, I do not believe the U.S. Supreme Court is going to leave this alone. And so what stands is that Colorado barred him from the ballot, because if they do that, there'll be other states, there'll be purple states that'll follow suit right along behind it. There'll be a Supreme Court precedent, and suddenly Pennsylvania will keep Trump off the ballot. And with keeping Trump off the ballot, and let's say Pennsylvania or some other purple state, there goes the election. And that really is, that. I mean, you think we're polarized right now, Mark. Think about that.
Well, it could be Pennsylvania takes Biden off the ballot. I mean, probably not Pennsylvania because of just the history. But the point is, it plays both ways. But more to the point, it's the law. That's why you're important here. I mean, I can game out the politics because you're right. I mean, once you've got that decision behind you, you can start removing candidates and you can claim that they were, you can claim whatever in terms of the overthrow. But I want to go back and ask you, when you say the Supreme Court, and they're talking about Scalia, the left is talking about Scalia. Those who want Trump removed, they're talking about the Scalia interpretation, and you've noted that they do. You've said that they won't get involved, but they have to get involved in order to prevent Colorado from removing Trump, Colorado or whatever state from removing Trump in this case, or a candidate. So how do they not get involved, but get involved enough to prevent that from happening?
Right. Well, they have to get involved for it to come out the way that I'm saying. If they had just, denied cert on it, then the Colorado decision would have stood. So I expected them to get involved. I guess I spoke a little bit too quickly. What I meant was not get involved in the merits. I don't think that they're going to, unless they reach the officer question and say the president's not an officer, which would be a precedent that would put an end to all of these cases. The president's not an officer. He's not covered by the 14th Amendment. It doesn't cover Trump. If they say that by 5 votes, that'll be the end of it, and they will have reached the merits on the officer thing. I think the rest of it, I just do not see the U.S. Supreme Court saying this did not constitute an insurrection in the sense that the framers meant. It was at the Capitol. It was so violent. It was to stop the transfer of power. That's exactly what the Confederates would have tried to do instead of having a transfer of power, right, to the Reconstruction Republicans, to the people who won the Civil War, somehow transfer power to the people who lost the Civil War, either overall or in the South. So this is exactly what I think they meant by an insurrection. I think the Supreme Court's not going to say he did not engage in it. So that's what I mean. I don't think they're going to reach the merits of any question except maybe the officer. They may just say, look, it's a political question, or it's one that has to be decided by the Congress. Yes, we vote state by state, but if someone's going to be not allowed to assume the presidency, it's going to be the Congress that has to decide. If you're 27 years old, you're under the age, it seems to me very likely that even if Taylor Swift was 27 and she caught on and she somehow won the presidency, you can imagine Congress saying, look, you're 27. It's that clear. She's not 27 anymore. But if she won it when she was 27, you're 27, it's that clear. Maybe with Schwarzenegger, they would have said, look, you were born in Austria, not in the United States. It's that clear you can't become president. But obviously, in this case, if they say it really is up to Congress or it's not up to us, it's a political question, the Supreme Court is knocking out what they did in Colorado. But beyond that, we're not getting involved. And then people say, well, wow, so Colorado can't keep him off the ballot. And what does that all mean? Obviously, people would then try to get Congress, right? The new Congress, if Trump won, to say Trump cannot assume the presidency. And that's something that they would do. Maybe there's some other way that they would try to. But I think the Supreme Court's going to say, yes, we're involved to the point that we are throwing out what Colorado did. And then I think it's going to be very murky what the reasoning is going to be. It's going to be a little like Bush v. Gore, where they say, you know what? We solved this emergency. We did this. I mean, the only argument for Bush v. Gore, Mark, is that the country was really in a crisis situation. It had to be decided fast. Can I say one other thing? Because people are all saying, why is this case from the D.C. Circuit on presidential immunity not being decided already? I thought this was being expedited. It was argued in early January. Why hasn't it been decided? Here we are in February, right? And then the Supreme Court gives you 90 days to file a cert petition. So even if they say the March 6th trial, they're saying on the D.C. insurrection in federal court, the criminal case, looks like it's completely knocked off balance because the Supreme Court will take so long and they have all these rules, and who's to tell the Supreme Court what to do with their rules? Let me just point out, Bush v. Gore, they decided within days. When the U.S. Supreme Court wanted to reach it, they decided it within days. And I think the famous Steele case and the Nixon case, well, the Steele case was decided directly by the U.S. Supreme Court. They didn't even let it go to the appellate court. That was the Truman case when he took over the steel mills, and they said he couldn't do that. And they said that directly without going to the Court of Appeals. But in the Nixon case, they decided the Nixon case within weeks. So anyone who tells you that the Supreme Court just cannot decide the presidential immunity, and so that's why Chutkan's trial is not going forward, I think that that's baloney. And by the way, last thing on Trump's federal criminal problems, we were so right about that case with the judge we lovingly call loose cannon down there in Florida. As it's the original sin, it's the mistake that Jack Smith made. Very, very smart guy, very experienced, very wise, but he should not have filed that case down there in Florida, knowing he had a 1 in 3 chance of getting cannon. That case had perfectly proper venue in Washington, D.C. That case could have been going to trial already by someone, Mark, who was used to these classified documents cases, who was in Washington, D.C. Trump's entire obstruction of justice and everything else that he did, he took the records in Washington, D.C., and he defied a subpoena and a bunch of orders that were coming from Washington, D.C. There was absolutely venue there. Smith should have done it there. And now I'm looking at the fact that there may not be a federal trial. And the two state trials, Mark, you have the one with Fani Willis. That one's, people say, how do you pronounce it? And the joke is fiasco Willis, because this is a fiasco. Whether it's legal or not, the optics of it are terrible. Sure. They're playing right into Trump's hands unless she resigns, really, or somehow totally severs herself in that case. And I think,
then the case will have a stink on it. Also, I have to say the one thing, and I maintained it from the start as well. Not even on the legal stuff seemed pretty straightforward because you had pointed it out. But the document case, I like it because it's easy to understand. So for the those of us in the general public, I get it. If people say, well, if you had one question to ask Trump, what would it be? I'd ask him, why did you take all those documents? You had so many. You have them in your bathroom, you had them in the ballroom, you had them in the office, you had them in the bedroom, you had them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's indefensible, regardless. And so I feel like it's an easy case to understand, and now we'll never get a chance to understand it in the way that he could actually be punished for what he did.
Mark, I still believe Biden is going to win. That will leave Trump continuing to be a private citizen with no control over the Justice Department in January 2025. And that case will move forward, or he'll work out a global disposition of some sort and plead guilty to some things and try to get this, as well as the huge money damages cases behind him, because the 83 million, that's all anybody was talking about for a few days, including us.
And then as you say, the state of New York has serious teeth in the damages there. So, it's going to be a lot of money.
The latest news is he spent $55 million on his criminal defense. That's pretty good spending. I mean, I think some of the huge corporations don't spend $55 million on his defense. Guess where he took the $55 million, Trump did? From all the $20 and $50 contributors who right there, what do you do for a living? They put retired. What a hero to the masses. He's taken the money from these poor people, from their Social Security check, from their retirement accounts. They sent $50 because they believe Trump's BS. And what does Trump do? He turns around. He spent $6 million on these lawyers that are not doing very well right now in his civil fraud case. I mean, to get a $370 million, I'm sure Trump is saying to himself, wow, for a $370 million verdict against me, I would have liked to have saved the $6 million on the lawyers. But then he says, you know what? It wasn't my money. It was the suckers' money. It was the people who
And I'm sure they'd be happy to pay that money. They love their Trump, you know what I mean? And it's Trump 2024! Yeah, MAGA Mickey, Trump 2024. They're happy to help him out. I mean, I really think you'd be surprised. They go, I don't mind. I don't mind that the former president used the money that way. It's crazy, but it's a fact. David, I got to wrap up. I love talking to you. Thank you. Let's do it again. There he is, Katsadamas. No glasses.
Oh, wow.
No glasses on Katsadamas there. His prediction, his track record on prediction, so impressive. And thanks again for the great Katsadamas. All right. Thank you, David. Talk to you soon. David Katz, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.